I'd like to introduce our speakers. This is Kurt Green and Sherri Wagner with Suicide.
Prevent Suicide, Manitowoc.
They're SOS.
SOS Suicide. I'm Kurt Green, I'm the Manitowoc County Coroner. I've also been in emergency medical services for about 32 years, and I've been doing that since I got out of high school. I've been the coroner for Manitowoc County, getting on the better part of a decade. I am a survivor of suicide. I've had a couple folks in my family take their lives, and whatever education I happen to have, being a survivor gives me a passion to work with the prevention side. This is Sherri Wagner.
I'm Sherri Wagner, and I too am a survivor. My son took his life 6 years ago, and since Joe died, I am a facilitator for suicide support groups. I was a facilitator in Sheboygan for 4 years, and now I'm here in Manitowoc.
Okay. So we gave the background on us. Just something so you're aware, there are a couple of programs, formal programs that you go to training for. One of them that some of in our group have been trained for is called QPR. It's called question. The QPR stands for Question, Persuade, Refer. What we're going to do tonight is we're going to talk about where I come from as a death investigator. I have the my job is to investigate people's lives backwards and find out how they wound up in my care as a coroner. So we're not going to do any formal training tonight. What we're going to do is we're going to discuss death in general. Then we're going to talk a little bit about suicide. We're going to talk about the general public's perception of suicide, how they see that. And then we're going to move on to the reality that I see as someone who sees somewhere between 15 and 20 suicides a year in Manitowoc County. Okay? The statistics for Manitowoc County, every year there's somewhere between 800 and 900 deaths in our county. In our county, there are, last year, there were 16 suicides. And for every suicide, there is a family that's left behind to discuss what was going on. And that's kind of become my passion, is trying to pick that apart. I'm going to talk a little bit about statistics, but I'll tell you something. When it comes to statistics, they don't mean anything if it happens to be your family member. You can say 90% of something causes something, but if you're in the 10% group where there's a negative action, it affects you. So statistics, again, kind of keep that in mind. It doesn't matter what brought me into your kitchen to talk about your child's suicide, I'm there. And that's going to be kind of the worst day of your life. Talking to me, you're going to have the longest week of your life. And so anything that I can do, anything that Sherri and I can do to help prevent that, or if the unthinkable happens, and you meet Sherri at the survivors group, that's what we do. We've been working on that for quite some time, but that's kind of our passion, is to working with the families. Okay. And then since 2008 to 2014, there were a total of 66 suicides in Manitowoc County. And then there were also 15 undetermined deaths. And undetermined deaths, even after an autopsy, just because there's an autopsy, you can't always tell why somebody died, or the reason that they died, or what we call the manner of death. A manner of death is suicide, or it's an accident, or a homicide. That is a manner of death, the cause of death, depending on how somebody took their life and how they died. If they died of a gunshot wound and they bled out, that would be a cause of the death. So when you were looking at a manner of death, there were 66 termed suicides. And then the 15 deaths that we couldn't quite figure out even after an autopsy, after a full investigation. When we do something undetermined, we question what was on that person's mind when they died. We don't know that. We weren't there. Maybe nobody was there. So we think, geez, you know, we want to be as fair as possible to that person and their family. So it may have been an accident. We don't have quite enough information that it was an accident. We don't have quite enough information that says it was clearly a suicide, so we termed it undetermined. So if you put those kind of numbers together and assume that we're wrong in about half the spot, we're looking at from between 2008 to 2014, probably somewhere around anywhere between 70 and 75 suicides in Manitowoc County, which is a lot. Imagine, again, numbers don't mean anything until it's your family that's affected by it. Of those 70 plus or minus people, there's a mom, there's a dad, there's brothers, there's sisters, there's cousins, there's a husband, there's a wife, there's children of that. Imagine the number of families that are impacted by that person taking their life. I mean, it's huge. So let's think about that a minute. Again, I'm going to talk a little bit about statistics, okay? Most completed suicide, we don't like the term committed suicide. There's a completed suicide, means the person actually died from the act of suicide, okay? Most completed suicides happen in a 35 to 50-year-old age group. But again, if it's your teenager, your grandfather, the statistics really don't mean anything. It just happens to be that that group of folks is the one that more often completes the act of suicide. And if you think about that, 35 to 50, I'm 50. When I was 35, I had 4 kids. So you kind of look at that perspective. That's a big age group for all those folks. Now, you know, regardless of again, the statistics, you're going to have children who no longer have a father or a mother. Children, I'm a grandfather, so you may have children, grandchildren who no longer have a grandfather or grandmother. I mean, the devastating impact on a family is amazing. You think about that age range. My kids are in their 20s. My grandkids are just toddlers, or infants and toddlers. They wouldn't get the benefit of seeing Grandpa Dad or Grandpa Kurt or their dad, the guy that they know that they can come home to, open the door, and I'll make them breakfast on Sunday morning or dinner on Sunday night, something like that. Imagine that age group there throughout our country that won't have that dad. They open the door anymore. There's dad, there's mom, there's grandma, there's grandpa, because of the act of suicide. Veterans, a large portion of that. In fact, nationally, 25% of those that complete the act of suicide are veterans. That's a huge number. Let me explain that in terms of just the state of Wisconsin. In the state of Wisconsin last year, there were between 600 and 700 suicides in the state of Wisconsin. 25% of those are veterans. So when you're looking at a number closer to 700, you know, you're looking at almost 200 veterans took their lives last year. 1 year in the state of Wisconsin. The youngest person in the state of Wisconsin last year that is a known suicide was 9 years old. The oldest is 91. One of those, there was several 91. One was 9. So you've got a 9-year-old child who has a parent, who has a grandparent, and likely a great-grandparent. Then you've got the 91-year-old who likely has a child, a grandchild, and a great-grandchild. The impact of these completed acts of suicides, kind of put that in perspective to your own life. And that's what Sherri and I are out here. We're trying to talk to you and put our lives into perspective for you. And hopefully by the end of the night, we can help you if you feel as though you need some help either from the grief side of it or from the prevention aspect of it too. Okay? But think about that family, 9 years old to 90 years old. There are 3 times as many homicides, 3+ times, 3 times as many homicides in the state of Wisconsin. I'm sorry, suicides. 3 times as many suicides in the state of Wisconsin as are homicides. Last year there was, I believe, 205 homicides in the entire state. It was almost 700 suicides. Crazy. There are more suicides than there are motor vehicle crash deaths. I mean, that's an amazing statistic. I mean, if you think about that. What you read about in the newspaper is the car accidents. John Doe died, ran a stop sign, killed somebody. 3 times that many. Those statistics are consistent in Manitowoc County. Manitowoc County, in fact, almost mirrors the state with those statistics. Okay. This is one thing that, am I supposed to stand in one spot?
You're good.
The public's perception of suicide. Our group prevents suicide in Manitowoc County. We're an education group. There's 5 of us on the board. We're going to be voting a couple new members on the board. Both survivors. But until you actually are affected by suicide in some way, and I'm hoping to actually affect some of you tonight, so to maybe open some eyes and say, wow, this is really an issue here. People are dealing with this. Real people in our county, our community are dealing with this. But what does the general public think about suicide? That's something that I have more conversations about with folks that just don't understand suicide. The general perception from people with suicide is that it was a purposeful act. Suicide was a purposeful act. And I'm going to read to you some comments from a newspaper that followed the death of a teacher in a different community. And the teacher unfortunately took her life in a very public way. But the comments that were in the newspaper were almost word for word what I've heard over the years as a trained, certified death investigator. I'm going to read some of that to you. And I don't mean that it should shock you, but it really gives, in my opinion, it gives a perception of ignorance. And I don't mean ignorance, I'm not calling names, I'm saying they don't know. The general public simply doesn't know. But here are some of the comments. We'll discuss them, we can talk about them if you've got any questions. This one person comment, rest in peace, question mark. She will burn in hell for committing suicide. If somebody said that after my family member took their life, I think I'd be a little upset about that. We're gonna read these comments, and then we're gonna talk a little bit more about the reality after that. Okay. So that was one. Here's one that I hear way too frequently. That bothers me just as much as the last one. But this person commented, "Suicide is a very selfish act. But I don't think the person doing it is aware of it. If they could think it through, they wouldn't do it. I'm sorry for those who had to find her and have that forever in their memory." Okay, this teacher happened to die in a similar fashion to how my brother died. Is a selfish act. I don't think the person doing it is aware of it. When we talk about suicide, is when somebody comes and makes that decision that they're going to end their life. A selfish act. I kind of compare it to a person in a building, on the top floor of that building, and the building is on fire. What's going through that person's head, the person who is making the decision that they're going to end their life. I use this analogy, that person that's in that building that's on fire, and they're standing at the edge of the roof, and that fire is catching up to them, and they're getting burned, and they're getting burned, and they're looking down, and they're getting burned. And finally, they can't take the heat anymore, and that person jumps off the building. Okay? When you think about a person who has takes their life, I put it in perspective for me that that person is so troubled by the things that are going on in their life, the isolation that they feel, the bullying that they feel, the social stigmas that they might have from an illness and injury. They may not feel as though they're worthy. They may have not have done well in school. They might have gotten fired from a job. Their lover may have broken up with them. But those things are the only thing going on in that person's mind at the time that they choose to take their life. And that's the analogy of that fire, is getting closer and closer and closer. And finally what they want to do is they want to end that pain. And that's how I look at it.
Can I say something?
Absolutely.
I guess, I don't think I'm a terrible person, but I guess my impression always was too that they were selfish, because if it was my husband that did it, I'd be like, why couldn't you have thought about me more than you thought about you? And why couldn't you think about our children and all that? So that's just what's always been in my mind until you're saying this to me, and I'm like, oh, there's other ways to look at it, I guess, but that is kind of how I felt about it.
I would agree. I would say that if it's like happening to you personally, I think selfishness is maybe what you would feel out of anger. Somebody who's angry, they would feel that that's a selfish act. And maybe if you're like me on the outside looking in, I think that it can be all different reasons. Sometimes it's a choice. Sometimes it's a cry for help. I really, just like people are all different, I think the reasons they commit suicide are all different too.
And what you just said there, from the outside looking in, that's my job.
Yeah.
And when we talk about, if it's your husband and leaving behind you and children, again, I get the benefit of, and I definitely don't mean that in a positive way, but it's my job. I get the benefit of standing out on the outside looking in. And what I get to do is, or what I do for a living, is I talk to everybody. I talk to that person's coworkers, whoever has completed the act of suicide. I talk to their coworkers, I talk to their family, mom, dad, brothers, sisters, children, neighbors. I get more and more information. And one of the things that we're going to talk about a little bit is that dynamic that I get, and that person from the outside looking in, that if everybody got together in a room and was able to say, hey, John told me this. John is having problems at work. John, his health isn't quite as good as you thought. But that almost never happens. And so you've got 10 people that know one or two things that's going on in John's life, but they never sit down in a room, because who does that? And then all of a sudden you realize John had a lot of problems. And as a husband, I'm that guy. Believe me, I'm that guy. I always tell, I don't always, but I do talk about stubborn guys. I'm 50 years old. I've raised my kids. I'm that stubborn guy. I just went on high blood pressure medication. I should have been on it a little bit longer than I am now. Just started cholesterol medication. I'm a stubborn guy talking to my doctor. I'm like, is there anything else we can do to put me on medications for this stuff? But no, I'm that stubborn guy because I don't face that. But I also don't talk to a lot of people about all of my problems. I got my good friends, that know a couple things. I've got my intimate partner, but nobody knows everything that's going on. But then at the end of the day, when I'm done with my death investigation and I sit down with the family, the intimate people in their lives, I tell them a story about what was going on. And then we sit and talk, and very often, that might take a day or 2 or 3 days, or sometimes even longer for me to gather all of that information. But what I'm also aware of is it takes that family member, those intimate people in that person's life, sometimes weeks, months, or even years for them to want to sit down with me and understand what was going on, what I learned from my investigation.
So do those kind of talks only happen after someone has completed suicide? Like if someone tried and it didn't happen, do you ever gather those groups of people to find out why or what they do?
I get the
or
benefit
anything?
doing what I do. Sometimes when people, not just with suicides, but drug overdoses, things like that, when people have trouble, they'll give me a call, they know me, they hear me on the radio every now and then, they might know me through social circles or some of the things that I do for a living, and they'll talk to me, and that's what I can encourage them to do. A statistic, a number again, for every completed act of suicides, there's between 10 and 15 attempts. Those attempts happen in the 15 to 25-year-old range. So when you get that many attempts, now put the numbers together. Last year, if we had 15, 16 suicides last year, multiply that by the lowest number, 10. It's 160 attempts. I listen to my radio all the time. I scan on my radio, and it scans the whole county. Sometimes there are 2 or 3 suicide attempts a day. I mean, there's that many in our county. But getting them together, that's what Prevent Suicide tries to do. That's the education process we try to do. Getting people to care until it's their family, that's a tough one. We'll talk about the risk in a minute.